In order to shake up my thinking a little bit about painting, I wanted to shift over to encaustics for a little bit. And this is a 24 by 24 inch panel. It's an oak panel. And you can see here some of the textures that I've gotten. Now later in the next video I'll show you how I applied these textures. But for now I just want to show how I set this up. In the next video I will show how I add chalk to my pigments, and I will actually show on camera how I applied the pigment onto the panel. But encaustics is quite a bit different from oils in many ways. It's always wet, you might say. You just have to heat it up and it becomes pliable when you apply it to the panel. And then you can reheat it later while it's on the panel, and you can scrape it and move it around with a variety of tools. Here's my basic palette, and as you can see it's a pancake griddle, which I purchased from Amazon.com. And if you want, I can put a link to that on my blog. And I bought a bunch of tin cups from a local art shop for making candles, and I've just melted some pigments in there. It works really well, and it's a cheap solution. Now, most of my pigments I've gotten from R&F, which is a place over in Kingston, New York, and the pigments come in these blocks, and so I've laid them out in identical to how I lay them out on my oil palette. And as you can see, some of the colors are quite vibrant. This cadmium red light is just really over the top. So, and same with this cadmium lemon. Now, it's interesting, when it cools, it looks a little cooler, appropriately, I guess you'd say, than the melted version. The melted green yellow looks, you can't really see it here in this video, but it's quite greenish. It has a bit of a greenish cast. It's the most lemon of all cool yellows I've worked with. So as far as brushes go, I try to keep things as inexpensive as I can, at least at this point where I'm just experimenting. Just buy some really cheap bristle brushes. I think I got 3 of these for $3 or something like that. This brush is really handy, and I'd like to pick up some more. It's the Skoda brand, but the thing about it is it's kind of a faux painting brush, and it's called a slot brush, and it has these slots between the bristles, the hog hair bristles, and it really can pick up quite a bit of paint. And that's one of the problems I have is my brush goes to the canvas. Well, I'm painting on panels now, but the paint tends to dry quite rapidly, the wax, and the slotted brush seems to hold more of the hot pigment, keep it hot. You can kind of squish the paint out of the brush, and it's quite nice. This brush tends to drip a little bit more. It doesn't quite hold the paint onto the bristles quite as much. Now I keep my heat at about 150 degrees, maybe just a little bit less, and I need to turn that down a little bit. And this is really handy. It's just a thermometer that you might use on a barbecue grill, and I can regulate my heat both while I'm making some mediums, and I just wanted to make sure that all the different places on my griddle have the appropriate heat, because you don't want to get your wax medium too hot. I use the heat gun after I get a lot of paint on, and I've found that the biggest problem with encaustics right now is getting the heat from my easel or my palette up to my panel. The paint tends to dry really quickly, so the paint that's on your brush will dry, and you can't get much paint off. You have to go back and get more pigment, and so on. So once you get to this point where it's quite a bit of paint on there, it seems like it's a lot more fun. Things get pretty interesting fairly quickly. So especially at the beginning phases of encaustic, you have to have a lot of patience. But later on, it gets quite a lot of fun. Another really fun aspect of encaustics is using ceramics tools and sculpting tools to scrape into the surface, and I'll show how I do that later on. But you can lay down a series of pigments onto the panel and then go back in and scrape. You can see right here I've scraped in some of the trunks of these trees, and it can be quite interesting. The different tools kind of give a different mark, and as I mentioned earlier, it can be much more akin to woodcut, or a medium I used to use a lot as an illustrator, which was scratchboard. Now the first thing I want to do is melt some color into this tin, which is just a candle making tin, and this is cadmium yellow deep, a very orangey yellow. So it's starting to melt in the tin there. So when I get a nice quantity of it, I will add some white. I'll just pour some white in using these vice grips. Just grab that and pour it in, and then I'll add just your garden variety of chalk that I got from Natural Pigments. Just pour some in there and hopefully try to make a real thick medium. Now I probably need to clean off my griddle here a little bit, and so I don't muddy that color, because I want it to be really pure and clean. And then either apply it with a palette knife or possibly load up a brush. We'll see how that goes. I've actually never tried this before, so it'll be an interesting experiment. Well, this particular griddle has a little hole for the oil to go down to when you're using it as a griddle, but it's a nice handy exit for when you clean your palette. And all of the wax will just go down in there and solidify, and then you can scrape that wax out and use it again. Now, encaustics are fairly expensive, unfortunately, but one thing I found is I can retrieve these bits of wax from the area that they're deposited in down there, and I can just reuse that. After a while I'll have a nice bit of gray there, probably a greenish gray. But I find that I don't waste much pigment. Your paints basically are never dry. If I want to wet the canvas up, you might say, I can just reheat that with the blow dryer. This actually isn't a blow dryer. This is a heat gun that I got from a Genesis oil paint system, and it gets quite hot. I think it gets up to like 180 degrees. A hair blow dryer just wouldn't work for one reason. It might not get hot enough, and it probably has too much force of air coming out. It might start to sort of move the paint around. Now, to clean my brushes, I use this soy wax, and as you can see, it's just started to melt up to here. In a few minutes it'll be very liquidy, and I clean my brushes in that, and it looks pretty dirty, but it actually cleans the wax out of your brushes quite nicely. So for instance, if I needed to clean the wax out of here, I could just soak it in that soy oil, or that soy wax, and then wipe it with some tissues, and it will just be quite clean. I mean, it's amazing how you can see this is very stiff. So you don't have to clean your brushes or anything. All I have to do is reheat that, and as long as I'm going to paint some greenish color with this brush, I don't have to clean it. I think eventually what I would like to do is get a bunch of slotted bristle brushes and have one for red, one for yellow, and so on, so that I can really keep my cleaning down to a minimum. But one thing that's good about encaustics is that the palette is never dry. I mean, the minute I heat it up, it's ready to paint. So you could have this set up in a corner of your studio and just have an encaustic going all the time, and it really wouldn't be much maintenance to do. So I may, if I really get into this, I may you know, just use encaustic as kind of a medium to try to shake up my thinking from time to time.